Okay, I think that we are ready to reconvene in this last session of this third conference of statistics on measuring the economy in the digital era. And this last session is a sort of policy panel to discuss on the future of official statistics, what to expect, and some ideas on next steps. So the way we will do this is to take a couple of rounds of the discussion on some of the issues I have that are more related to these future challenges, and then hopefully, assuming that we will have enough time, we can open up the floor for broader participation from participants. Okay, so well, the first issue the first topic that I would like to propose is to discuss on the challenges that the statistical offices and the producers of official statistics face at the time when there's so many sources of new data. There are many producers of statistics that are not official statistics, but maybe faster, maybe more attractive, or maybe more shocking to the public. So perhaps today we have a little, I think, a lot more of competition in generating data for public discussion. And at the same time, as was mentioned in the previous session, we also have to deal with the issue of fake news. So in addition to having other producers of data, we have data that is that may be not true or maybe not accurate, and statistical offices and central banks and other producers of official statistics have to navigate in this more complex world. So I would like to propose to discuss a little about this, how you see ways in which the communication, dissemination, and of course the production of statistics may help safeguard the credibility of official statistics, may generate enough trust from the public in dealing with other sources of data, and then to provide a more solid source for the discussion of public policies, as many of us are involved in. So perhaps we can start with that, starting with you, Carlos.
Thank you. First of all, let me make a point that this conference is a very timely one, and I want to congratulate Governor Marcel for taking the initiative to promote it. I think that it will be possible to say that there was before and after this conference, because we have here a lot of people that are very important for statistics production and statistical reflection. Saying that, I think that we need to go back to what was said by Martin Hilbert. Martin Hilbert has shown that there are a lot of information available. There are a lot of data available, and we can exploit this data in a way that makes 500 billion possibilities if we want. And the question is, what is the information that we need to want from this data available? What is the point that we want to make? And this goes back to a point that for me is critical, is that we are doing statistics till now under a set of concepts that are coming from an idea that some concepts are critical for understanding the economy, to understand the movement of the economy, and to explain what is happening. And what we see now is that there are other information that we need. And the main point that I think that we need to begin is, have we a picture about the reality that is credible enough, or are we missing information in order to get a picture of the reality? In economic terms, and in social terms. And we saw that in economic terms, we need to grasp with the idea of global value chains, and with the idea of, I will say, all-scale platforms in what concerns trade and distribution, and how to grasp it in statistical terms is the first point, with all the implications in terms of financial area, payments, and so on and so on. And we need to have the possibility to make a picture. And after, we have a second problem, that is how we compare the picture that we take in time t to time t plus 1. And to compare two pictures means that you understand the movement and what he's doing, what is moving from one point to the other. And I was very interested by the presentations that were done by Francisco Gillen and by Penny Bamper, because what they are doing now is to try to get into the statistics a different reality from one that we had before. Before, we are dealing with autonomous unities that were competing in national terms, in international terms, with a rationality that was the rationality of survival of each one. We are going for a different type of unities that have internalized the international trade, and where the rationality of their decision is not the same as we were facing before. And this is very important, for instance, if you think about exchange rate pass-through. Exchange rate pass-through will not be the same within the global value chains and with the autonomous exporters. It will be different because they have other trade-offs to deal with. And on the same point, I was very interested by the presentation that was done by Elias, because he's also going to the idea that we need more timely information, and we need to, I will say, to go deeper in understanding what is dynamics beyond the investment, beyond the price formation. And for that, we need to get more data. And this goes to a point that for me is clear now, is that we need to have understanding what are the implications of global value chains, of transactional platforms on dynamics of the economy. And second, we need to have the concepts to understand or to grasp this situation. And after, we need to have statistics or the possibility to measure what is going on. And the second implication of that for me is that we need to think that, and it was made, a point was made by Elias about economist tax, when he spoke about economist tax. We need to think about the point that we are providing a public good, information. We are providing a public good that is determinant for the dealing with the economic policy. And we need to ensure that this public good is as good as possible, and this means put aside fake information, is reliable, is pertinent, and at the same time is integrated. And I'm fighting a lot for the idea that we need to create at the national area, in national terms, the idea of a single data warehouse. A single data warehouse after a problem of ownership, but we need to understand that a single data warehouse is compatible with several owners for several parts of and after with creation of criteria in what concerns the possibility to exceed that data warehouse. And for me, it will be an important point if we are able, for instance, in the case of our microdata, to put the information that is available in different areas of public administration there, to make it reliable, and after provide it for research and for understanding the evolution of the economy. Other way, and we go to the point, another point. Other way, we are dealing with good information, limited, banded information, making bounded statements or banding or with abundant knowledge of the reality. And we need to enlarge our capacity to understand the reality if we want to grasp with the new social phenomena, with the new economic phenomena. Otherwise, it's not possible. And at the same time, as someone says, nature is always fulfilling what is empty. There is no empty. Empty is always fulfilled by others if we leave them. This means that others with the information, with data, will exploit our ignorance or the fact that we are missing. If the official statistics is missing, someone will take advantage of the information that is available. And it was very clear with the presentation of Martin Hilbert. Someone will take, and after it's that we have two problems. We are giving a private advantage with public information or without providing a public good. This means that in some way we are creating inequality in the society, but at the same time we are creating an advantage for someone to make use of fake information. And on top of that, we are creating a problem, is that we will not be able to provide to the society the guarantee that there is no manipulation of the society by those that have the information that is missing to others. And one of the points that for me is clear is the statistic exercise and the statistics provision to the society is a way of providing to this society, I will say, a defense against fake news, fake information, or fake theories. And if someone is providing to the press the right information, and we need to deal with the press in the right way, because if we want to have a public opinion that is informed, that is not manipulated, we need good public institutes with integrated information, and we need also to deal with those that are mediators between public opinion and the, I will say, the reality, that are the press, public press that is doing their job in the right way. But we need overall to have the possibility to show that it's possible always to check if the information is right or not, is fake or not fake. And till now, in what concerns statistics, we are staying on the stage of those that have, I'll say, they put on the table what they have, but are not announcing how good it is. We are not selling well the information that we have. We are not showing how important it is for the society. And if we don't do that, people are not able to understand that they can check. And I will finish with this point. We are announcing, in our case, Banco Portugal, we are announcing now a new internet provider that gives the possibility to the public to get all the statistics they want with the format that they want and with the combination that they want. Why? Because our role is not now to publish 2 or 3 or 5 or X tables of information. It's to give the information to people, reliable information, to give them the instruments and to ask them if you want to compare exports to Chile with exports to Mexico and exports, please do your own table, put together all the numbers that you want. But for that we need to educate also people, namely the corporate sector, in order to make them to understand that they are responsible for the good utilization of the data that we make available, and that we put the data at their disposal in a way that they have no difficulty to get advantage of that. And for me, it's a critical point in order to fight against the fake news or fake data. In that case, fake data that will feed up after, or will feed fake news. For me, we are in a turnaround in what concerns the conception or the understanding what is the role of statistics service and the statistic information, and I will say data service that will be available by public authorities to the public opinion.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Mariana Kotzeva, your views on how to build trust for statistic offices.
Okay, now thank you very much. I joined the governor in compliments for organizing this very interesting conference. Just the last session generated so many questions, maybe for a future conference to continue this dialogue. You specify now the question further, but I just wanted very shortly just to maybe summarize some points, because your question at the beginning was a bit broader. So I think that we could reflect on the general future of official statistics in these challenging times in three different aspects. The first one, what is there for us as producers, as our business model. And there I just wanted to repeat what was said at the beginning today. We have to speed up, and we have a lot to prepare to use these new data sources to integrate new technologies before we even start negotiating with the other partners. The second point is, this is a big change for statistics. I know from my own office and from our European corner, we have to accept that we have to experiment, and that we have to publish statistics under development, experimental statistics. The right word could be found, but the word cannot wait for us for 6 years to experiment in darkness, closed, having conferences, and then to deliver a hard number after 6 years when nobody will need it. Because meanwhile, somebody will produce other numbers. So this is very important to experiment. Then actually the third and last point on the production side is, we are questioning the boundaries of official statistics, because we need to use more nowcasting, more modeling in order to integrate sources. At the same time, we are symbol of the so-called hard data, without assumptions, just we go, we collect them, and we produce something what is solid. So, but we have to find the optimum between these two extremes. This is on the production side. On the trust side, I also was very much inspired today by the first presentation. I was listening, professor from the university. I was thinking, yes, we are trying to fix, and Stefan said the same, the dots here and there, but we are forgetting about fundamentals. And fundamental is that in unstructured data, as you see, when we just gather from data some interesting conclusions or correlations which do not have sense, and then we try to make a picture, it doesn't work easy. So we should not forget that the advantage of official statistics is that we have the phenomena like we discussed on digital economy. We measure, we construct the theory, we have the whole picture, we are seeking representatives of the population. This is a whole, if you want, conceptual, intellectual, scientific process. And this brings me to the point, to the outside world, that we have to work about literacy. That statistics and working with data should be part of digital literacy. And this literacy has different aspects, starting from the schools, going through really efforts for literacy of policymakers. And policymakers, how they should approach information in today's world of big data. I could give you numerous examples from the European Union experience, which is famous with evidence-based policy making, and maybe in OECD as well. We had a joint event for ambassadors, actually, with OECD, to and then there were basic questions, you know, how we define representatives, how we approach the data. So let me summarize. Literacy point is very important. And we have to speak, we have to show, we have to joint efforts to do literacy. Then the final point is on communication. Of course, for years, the talk about communication was just how to improve the products, more visualization, storytelling, but the topic is much broader than this. Today's world shows that our data could continue their life once they are produced and published by us. And this is a way to increase the trust of official statistics through researchers, or through media, through journalists, or through fact-checkers, for example. Very concretely, in European Union, we had elections in May, European elections, and there were a lot of frustrations whether, you know, the stories which we saw in US elections and UK referendum with using the data for political purposes will be used during the European elections. And there were a number of actions what Eurostat did. We just created a contact with the fact-checkers, and we provided for them service, that they are the ones who follow fake news and they take actions, but they wanted to base their actions on official statistics. And they appear as a different client in addition to media, to other users, where we try to develop a service for them, how they could access and use our data. Similar to researchers in a way. So the point is that on communication is just to not to make our products more fancy. It's important to develop further partnerships and to stimulate that our data are referred to. I have a regular conversation with OECD. We are making a joke that we provide data to OECD for the European Union. I want to see Eurostat as a source of the data. This is my simple wish. And I have the same fight with services in the European Commission, because the communication department of the European Commission doesn't put a source. So this is a simple thing that we have to be referred. It should be said, Banco of Portugal, or statistics from Eurostat or from OECD. So they are simple things which have to be made, which refer to us, because otherwise we are lost in an ocean of information. And then final point on communication is to work with citizens. Nothing more helps to the image of official statistics when the people started to speak that these are data, in our case from Eurostat, or even they started in the social media to fight with each other using the same number from Eurostat. But the most important argument was that it's a number from official statistics. And that's why we have to publish data which are not so important. They are not interested in GDP and unemployment. They are interested from Chile, which is the product which is most imported in the European Union. For simple statistics, and this helps to maintain the image of official statistics. It might sound strange, but we have invested in this in the last 2 years. We created a section of news, everyday news. We have 4 news every day on topics which are not always the traditional topics, but these nice statistics which are more of curiosity, and this helps a lot. People started to look more to our website, and looking first at the simple statistics, they then go to more sophisticated pages. So this will be my starting point of starting list of points, of course, which need further discussion. Yes.
Thank you, Mariana. Nadim, you have one additional challenge, which is to attribute data to Eurostat.
Well,
but I think that on this topic, OECD has the additional challenge of producing or publishing statistics for an even broader set of countries. So how to navigate this complex world of statistic products and building credibility.
Oh, perhaps I can start with a little anecdote on Mariana's observation about Eurostat references. I had a conversation not so long ago with somebody from a ministry who was saying, well, why are we giving money for the statistics office to produce all the data? We just get it from you anyway. and I explained to them, well, I mean, where do you think the data for that country actually comes from? We don't produce it ourselves. And so I agree 100% that I think we need to make it clearer what the source data is, because sometimes it can get lost in the fog of basically of this type of discussion. On the issue of perhaps fake news and how we can best counteract it, I think perhaps the best way is to not allow there to be spaces in the statistical infrastructure. I mean, we don't want to create these vacuums of data where others can come along and start to populate and provide information that we are not providing. But I think it's also important to recognize, and this conference well illustrates that there's an awful lot that's going on today that perhaps wasn't going on 20 years ago. If we had this same type of conference with the same types of questions 20 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to answer them in quite the same way. But certainly what we've seen in terms of the role of statisticians and statistical offices, certainly over the last 5 or 10 years, we're much more proactive now in a way that we used to be reactive. And in fact, both in terms of the information we provide, the spaces where we provide that type of data, but also the source of information that we use and the dissemination of the data, and the examples that we saw this morning in terms of the very innovative use of microdata that's held within statistics offices is one way of counteracting that vacuum of data that others find themselves in. I mean, certainly we should basically pat ourselves on the back. I mean, I'm not saying this is necessarily the end of the story. There's still lots that has to be done, but we should pat ourselves on the back and recognize that there has been a massive transformation in the work that statisticians do over the last 10 years. If we think about, for example, global value chains, we started having conversations around global value chains in 2011, where there was a realization that we weren't able to provide information about international fragmentation of production in a way that users wanted that information. And within 2 years, as a collaboration between ourselves and the WTO, we had provisional estimates on the table. So that was basically from 2011 to 2013. Now that may sound like slow, but we're talking about a database providing you with a view of the production process at a global level at the time for 60-odd countries, which was basically within 2 years and occupying a space that nobody else had. But what was happening in the absence of that information is that people were using any information to derive any types of assumptions they wanted. So I think that's a recognition that lots have changed, and we are now much more active. I mean, we had this conversation yesterday morning, I think, at breakfast, and I said, a long time ago, if you'd asked me as a statistician what my benchmark was, it would have been perfection. I would have said, for example, that we need to have perfection, we need to have credibility and 100% certainty in the data that we produce. But we don't have that luxury anymore. We know, for example, that there are others producing data that's significantly inferior to what we can produce, but we don't because our target has always been perfection. And that has to change, and I think that it has to change by recognizing that actually our limit now, or our reference, should be, can we do a better job than others are currently doing out there? Because whether we like it or not, that data that's being provided by others in unofficial senses is being used. It's being used by banks, it's being used by ministries of finance. They're using that data in the absence of us providing that information. So our benchmark needs to be adapted to reflect this new reality. And that doesn't mean, for example, that we give it the label of official statistics. Lots of countries, and indeed we've seen it also in Chile, are now looking, for example, at this label of experimental statistics to occupy that space. You don't damage the credibility. In fact, you enhance the credibility of the organization because it's demonstrating that, look, we're serious about responding to these concerns, and here is some experimental data that we're going to carry on working on, and we're going to see what we can do and how far we can take it. I mean, we have to remember that this is all taking place within basically a frozen budget for most NSOs. I mean, they don't have basically the luxury of having a new topic arrive on their table and then saying, okay, well, thank you very much, we can advance on this, we need new data, we need new people, we need new resources. They manage all of this within largely frozen, in some cases reduced budgets. And so I think that there's a testament to how well they've adapted to this new environment is the fact that you've got a proliferation of new data that wasn't there before. I mean, I could talk for ages about the different types of data sources that exist today that didn't exist before, capitalizing on existing information. So the innovation that you see today is about saying, what can we do more with the data that we already have? So we have, for example, new information that links business statistics to trade statistics, and so we can have new information about the granularity of exporting and importing firms that wasn't there before, but the data had always been there. We have information today on foreign affiliate trade statistics, we have information on modes of supply. These are all responding to policy concerns where there was no data before. So I think that's a really important thing that we have to take away. So for me, occupying the space, using the best quality data that we have is perhaps the most fundamental way of doing it. I think later on we'll have conversations about other ways in which we can deal with some of the issues, for example, around the granularity in data, and we began to have some of that conversation earlier on. But I think that would certainly be one way of doing it. Making microdata available to users as well is also a very cost-effective way of responding to some of the concerns, although, of course, there are certain, I think, challenges that come through with microdata access, and we're going to have to think a little bit about how we can manage that microdata access. I mean, one of the issues that we do have with microdata access more generally is coordinated requests. I mean, there was a case not so long ago, and I won't mention the OECD country, where a number of users collaborated individually with requests to the statistics office for data that satisfied, in each case, the confidentiality arrangements. But of course, when you brought all the information together, they were able to identify individuals. And so there were some concerns there in terms of how we can manage the massive increase that we see across countries in terms of microdata access. So when you set up a research center, you know that will basically multiply in terms of as its visibility grows, so will its users grow. And you're going to have to think, how can we manage all of these multiple requests? For me, one of the things that still needs to happen, and we're beginning to have those conversations now with Eurostat, and indeed with countries, is can we make more granular information available that responds directly to the concerns of those users that are actually accessing this microdata? I mean, there are simple things, for example, around distributions of data. You know, we've made advances over the last few years in focusing much more on the distribution of firms, the distribution of individuals, the distribution of households, moving away from averages. But now, you know, there's so much more that we can do, and I think that we just have to up our game a little bit in some areas. So we're doing very well, but there's more that we can do.
Well, both you and Carlos mentioned global value chains. I think it's a very good example of some of the issues that we have discussed, in the sense that it's something that started with a concept or filling a gap in our understanding of how trade worked, then generating the data and measuring. And I think what is particularly interesting is the usefulness of the concept and the data today in the current phase of the economic cycle, because it would be very difficult to understand how let's say the elasticity of trade has responded in the last couple of years. You know, when you have a relatively moderate change in growth forecasts, but at the same time, global trade is stagnant. So without the notion of global value chains and how different countries engage in that process, it would be very difficult to understand it. Bruno, you focus a lot on financial data.
Yeah.
And there, of course, after the global financial crisis, there was a lot of criticism on the fact that despite having so much data, maybe we were not measuring the right things, and that there were data gaps that were very important. So how you see that, you know, in this context of building credibility for official statistics?
A lot has been said. So a few points. I think we all agree during the conference that preserving the trust in official statistics is really key. And at least for central banks, we should not forget that a lot has been achieved. So when you look over the past 2 decades, Central Bank of Portugal, Central Bank of Chile, Central Bank of Indonesia, Central Bank of Malaysia. It's impressive, the progress that has been made. So we should build on that. And we should continue to have central banks leading by example in this area of financial statistics, of course, independently of the national statistical institutes. But this means quality, confidentiality, and transparency, especially when we explore indicators, as you suggested. The second point is that, of course, we need to explore new ways of doing statistics because of this challenge, these new market providers, etc. And for this, it's very simple. At least for central banks, sometimes I receive questions from one central bank saying, oh, we don't know which dashboard we should use. What is the dashboard used by central banks in the world? So what we did was very simple, just a survey explaining to central banks what others are doing. So the exchange of experience seems to me very important, and it is, of course, something that the BIS likes to promote. The third point is what you said yesterday, Governor, that there should be no man's land. We should avoid giving the impression that nobody is in charge. And at least on global financial institutions, we try to do something in this area with the central banks and the BIS. My gut feeling is that on the multinational enterprise, the OECD is willing to take the lead, and I really much think that it's very important. Also, the global flow of funds, there needs to be someone looking at the global flow of funds, and I know that the IMF is doing a lot of work in this area. So there should be the sentiment in the public that someone is in charge. Because if they say, oh, no, nobody is really looking at these statistics. And the last point, and this is more personal, but it goes back to what I said this morning. So we provide credibility when we use data from others. And I think it cannot continue like this forever. At some point, we cannot regulate, of course, but we have principle of official statistics. We could reflect perhaps of code of conduct or something like this. So when, for example, at the BIS, we use data that we buy from commercial data providers, perhaps we should ask them to say, yes, we can certify or we can say that we apply these principles, because the risk is too high that we provide credibility and at some point we will use data that are distorted or, yeah. Mm-hmm. So this would be my 4 points.
Okay. Well, in the next round that I hope takes a little shorter so that we have time for questions, but I'm not complaining because your interventions were very rich. But you know, in this, let's say, in speaking of the feeling in facing the digital economy, there are sort of two types of sentiment. One is the notion of feeling overwhelmed by technological change and the difficulty in responding to that. But there is a second sentiment that is, let's say, huge excitement on so many things that you can do. And at the board of the bank, we have discussed a number of times, you know, how to prioritize, because when you have big data, well, you can produce statistics with at a very high frequency or extreme granularity, or you may be measuring many things, but still resources are limited. So I wonder what would be your advice or what you see as a good practice in different countries in structuring on a certain strategy to prioritize from all the different sources of data, possibilities to generate indicators, and so on.
On my side, I think that the point is the following. What are the most important questions that we need to answer, and what are the most urgent ones? And because it's the only way to, after to go to the data and to look if we have answers to these questions. If you ask me what will be the ones that we need to understand, first of all, price and wage formation for a central bank is critical. We need to have more information, deeper information, and to go to some, I will say, granularity in order to understand what is going on. We need to understand what is going on the employment market in order to understand after how it works with the inflation evolution. For us, it's critical because we need to understand it. After, we need to understand distribution problems. We need to have to go from average to distribution of series in order to understand what are the distribution problems that we have. And I will think, for instance, that we need to understand better what is beyond the gross figures that we produce. Without putting at risk the concept, it's not that. It's to look how to enrich this concept with other concepts in order to get an answer to some social and economic questions that we are dealing with. But it's my way of dealing with the situation. What I will, if I was a statistician, I will ask my customer, what is your problem? What is the answer what is the explanation that you are trying to get in order to see what is the data that you need? Otherwise, everything is priority, nothing is priority. And what is missing very clearly is what I told yesterday, a general theory, or I will say an understanding about what we are doing, what we need to understand. For instance, if we think about the financial crisis that we had, the main questions were not put, and the statisticians were not able to answer because the question was not put. For instance, salvation. For instance, the non-banking sector intervention. For instance, the capacity of sovereigns to face this problem. And this will be only possible if the question was put. And after, if we had the figures to understand how big it was, the problem. But the problem is always to be very clear, to make justice, to be fair with the statisticians. They are not able to answer questions that are not formulated in the right way, or even that are not formulated. And this means that first responsibility is for the policymakers to make clear what are they trying to understand, and after to ask if it is possible with data available to answer or to clarify, and if the data available is not enough, if it is possible to produce new data, empowering the statistics office to produce this data. Is my way of answering to this question. But in reality, the urgency means that people are asking for information, information is not available, and they forget. And the question will be different. Information is not available, the problem is important, we need to get this information, and we need to prepare ourselves to get the indicators and everything that is needed to make the right approach.
Mariana?
It's also a very good question, which requires maybe a separate debate. Try to be very, very short and just to bring maybe one answer focused on digital transformation, which was the topic of the conference. There are two different aspects in this particular domain, but maybe they are relevant also for the other domains. First is we try to respond to the demands for information, for concrete policies, which are changing. And I always have discussion with Eurostat team warning me, we shouldn't be like a news agency, you know, that today somebody says it's important to have policy on children, let's build up statistics on children. Tomorrow somebody says we need to do something for all elderly people, and then we have to respond. So this is so it's important to have a balance through a structured user dialogue, where it's important to have predictability, and where it's also important to have this dialogue with the users, that the right questions are put in place. And that's why statistics has to be there at the discussion of what questions could be answered on the basis of what information, what exists, and what still needs to be covered. So this is one aspect. The second aspect, which is very important as well, is this overall responsibility which we have to provide fundamental statistics, if I may call it like this, on key phenomena, which will be always there, if I say it's a core statistics. And digital transformation belongs also to this category, because we need to, and there we have more work inside the statistical community, where we have to focus on definitions, on understanding how to measure, all the discussion which we had here. And there we have the, how I should say, the challenge and the responsibility that we have to show to the outside world, in the outside to statistics, in a coordinated way, that we are responding. And for me, the right way is to go, all our efforts which were presented here as well, to go through the United Nations Statistical Commission, where from different regions we bring the research work, and we, let's say, set the standards, and then we deliver. If you want me to give an example, to populate the satellite account on digital economy, so that we could come with many countries to show that we measure in this way and the data are comparable. And in doing that, we have to speak. We have to make an advertisement on what we are doing, because otherwise we will receive the from prominent speakers comments on social media that only statistics doesn't understand what is going around. So these are the two, let's say, aspects which are very important, that we should not go to the extreme of only serve policy needs which are changing and forget about the fundamental role where we need to measure basic things in the economy and society and environment as well.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Nadim?
Well, I'm not going to respond to the question about prioritization of different things. I think that others have responded quite well to that already. But I think what I will say is that there are things that we can do better to respond to them, given the fact that we do have basically these restricted resources. And events like this, for example, are one example of those types of things that we can do. But we have common problems globally. Every country is facing the same type of challenge when it comes to responding to policy, and generally the policy gaps are all in much the same places. But we also have common data, and we have common solutions. And I think that the really important thing is that rather than every country reinventing the wheel individually, it's these types of fora, information sharing, that really provide an awful lot of value to each individual office. And we can see today, for example, that somebody can have a web scraping tool that develops indicators that are then tested by one country. That information can be shared to others, and so they have a head start in terms of how they can adapt and absorb that type of information. Whereas in the past, of course, what would have happened is that everybody would be going out there doing their own thing with their own data sources individually. Today, the challenges are very different. I mean, the challenges in terms of the volume of different types of private data that's available, but also the nature of the problem is much more global than it used to be in terms of these interactions that we see. Today it's about trying to identify M&Es or digital platforms which have global presences, and so the challenges are no longer about just being able to identify the activity in my country, and it's about identifying somebody somewhere else, and that requires perhaps a bit of a sea change in the way that we work or collaborate with each other. It requires that we try to think again about how we can break open some of these barriers to data exchange and data sharing within countries, across countries. Some countries collect information that is valuable to others but are restricted from providing that data to them. And I think that we have to think about what can we do to break open that box. I mean, for many years I've been saying that we operate in a bit of a straitjacket to some extent when we collect data. And we tell firms that we promise that it's going to remain confidential. And that's good, don't get me wrong, that's good. But it also creates difficulties for us, because then users say, well, look, that same information is available publicly online. Why can't I get it from you? And we say, because we promised you wouldn't share it. So I think that we have to think again about how we collect data from firms. We could have an opt-out, for example. We can say if you want this to remain confidential, tick this box, otherwise it's going to be publicly available. Or we can say, for example, that the data that you provide will be publicly available within 3 to 5 years. But that's a conversation that we need to start in a way of basically allowing there to be data exchange and best practice across countries.
Bruno.
How to balance the risk of being overwhelmed and all the new things we can do. Perhaps I would make 2 points. One is we need time consistency. We need to keep our eyes on the ball and we need to finish the job. Statistics, it's like a slow-moving ship, so it takes years. So just to finish what we have started, for example, in the Data Gaps Initiative, we have not completed. Think we don't even have harmonized data on public debt across countries in the world, and I'm not just mentioning emerging market economies. Even among large industrial countries, we don't have comparable data for public debt. So I think we need to continue the work, and what we are currently reflecting all together as the international organizations working in the context of the DGI, what's next after the Data Gaps Initiative, after 2021, how to keep the momentum so that people will continue to progress. So we need to be consistent. At the same time, we need to be open to new things, and that's why I think the link between collecting the data but also using it, either for policy or for other usage, like informing the public community, as you say, is very important. And my point is that the central banks are very well placed because we are producers and users. So this seems to me a guarantee that at least we will not be too excited and jump from one area to another one, because each time there is a priority that is given, because we need to look at the usage of the statistics. And for example, what was presented this morning for Bank of Portugal and also Bundesbank is how to track the use of the micro data sets. This is very useful. Because it gives you an idea of what should be the priorities, because you need to finish the job and to consider new things. So.
Okay, thank you very much. So perhaps at this point we can open up the discussion for your comments and questions for the panel. So please raise your hands and the micro will get to you.
I wanted to ask the panel, because the reliability and accuracy of household and company surveys has been questioned in the last few years because of increasing amounts of non-response. And how do you think there could be initiatives to revitalize this data and combine it with more accurate data sources to provide better information?
Thank you. Another question? Yes, Gloria?
Thank you. Measuring digital economy and incorporating big data in our processes implies innovation. And at least in our job and at the central bank, we always have this trade-off among being innovative, creative, but at the same time keeping our job very well with high quality. We cannot make mistake. The credibility is a very important asset to us. So this is a question that we always have, and we have to make decision. And we are now in our strategic plan, we have incorporated to be more innovative. And so I would like to know how in your institution you are promoting innovation.
Okay, perhaps we can start with those two, and maybe we can begin with Bruno so that the issues don't get discussed by everyone before they get to you.
2 points. The first question, yes, the survey, etc. My feeling is that we should exploit administrative data sets much more. There is a lot of data available, and for this particular issue of households, difficulties to measure wealth, for example, you clearly see in many countries that administrative data sets could be used and are not used enough, and we need to there is, as was said this morning, a gold mine there. The second point on innovation, so at the BIS we have launched exactly for that an Innovation 2025 project with all central banks. Yeah, it's difficult. You have to balance because we have limited resource. So the answer to this is, of course, to explore, exchange experience. This is really, and have people together to limit that what you were saying, that people are reinventing the wheel in each country. But it's difficult, of course. Yeah.
Well, I think you answered the question on basically how you deal with non-response very well. I mean, administrative data for me, I think, is pretty much one of the main solutions. I mean, private source data as well is also an opportunity, but it comes with particular types of challenges in terms of quality and reliability. On the issue of innovation, what we're doing at the OECD is, I mean, we've set up a whole new division that's looking at, it's developed a smart data strategy. So it's really looking to the future in terms of how we can bring an awful lot of these discussions or these types of data to the table. I mean, across a whole range of different work areas at the OECD, not just in terms of macroeconomic statistics, but also in the area of well-being, where there's been an awful lot of innovation over the last 10 years using basically different types of smart data approaches. So, for example, having questionnaires online that people can fill in, and we collect the information ourselves directly, and then we use that to measure our well-being index or our house life index. So there's an awful lot that's going on there that's structural. But we're also making sure that it's about people, because we recognize as well that trying to navigate this new data explosion, or trying to make sense of some of this data, requires different types of skills and different types of people from the ones that have traditionally been responsible for the compilation of national data within national concepts. And so within my team, for example, we're developing a database on multinationals using web scraping tools, and so far that has generated a view of the top 100 multinationals, and with the idea of expanding it to the top 500 by the end of this year. But it requires a very different skill set to the ones that we traditionally used, and all of that is based on basically getting or scraping publicly available information. And this goes back to my earlier point about, to some extent, this strange absurdity that we have where a lot of the information is available online, but we know that the NSOs have exactly the same, hopefully, information as we're able to scrape. But we want to have some way of basically capitalizing on the data that exists already, rather than having to invent some of these tools that go out and bring it together. I think just in terms of a lesson of what other countries are doing, I mean, what other countries are doing as well is they set up dedicated sort of research parts of their statistics office or central bank, and so that group is permanently staffed, and they're the ones who are tasked with trying to develop new indicators with a view to seeing how that new indicator is eventually mainstreamed within the core part. But what you have to avoid, of course, is that they become the ones who mainstream it. You need that group to always be at the frontier of research and doing the cutting edge work that can then be passed on to others.
Yes, thank you. On the first question, I just want to add to the colleagues, in addition to administrative data, digital sources. Let's use an example. Household budget surveys or time use surveys are the one which have the highest drop in the response rate. And then using scanner data, so this is a digital source, it's not just an administrative source. So this is the way to use new technologies and new sources, or use a smart device to do the time use survey. So on the second question, on innovation, this is my day and night question, because this is a question for every manager, how we could make it happen. And there are a couple of points. Of course, I make a difference between research, more research type of activities where it makes sense to have part of the organization which does research, explores new data sources, new indicators, etc. And what, Stefan, what you said, the fantastic job which was done in the last 5 years, what that kind of job, like research on different sources and how we could use them for purposes of official statistics. But I have one big but, which stress my team every day, but we don't have results in official statistics. And this is the second part of innovation, which is more responsible. We are talking about innovation for real production. So I want to know all these experiments, and if they are failure, it's also a result, that conclusion that we cannot use this source for tourism statistics, so it doesn't make sense to invest, because you are not going to get a much bigger improvements. It's also a result. But my recipe is what I try to do, at least in my organization, and I was sending an email this morning to my team that because they try all the time to go to the research part, and I try all the time to bring them to the real production, really to consider in each domain and to start with initial portfolio of use cases. So we have such for skills and using web scraping, for migration using mobile data, just to give an example, for multinationals using also web scraping together with you, to have really use cases and to look in the concrete domain what we could do based on the research which we have to change something in the real production, so we could get either new statistics faster, with a bigger granularity, or with new insights, very concretely. And to put an initial portfolio of use cases, and then we try in a very short time horizon to deliver. So this would be my approach. So hopefully at the next conference we will be able to share experience whether it works. But let me finish with the sentence which I had one of discussions with my team, with young people, and I remember this sentence, what struck me when I hear it, but it is very true, and I repeat it every time when I have to answer to such kind of question. Young person told to me, the problem is that we try to solve the issues of tomorrow with tools of today. And this is not the way. We have to solve the issues of tomorrow with the tools and thinking of tomorrow. And then this is the challenge, that we have the propensity to think in statistics in the current way. So one important element for overcoming this is to open statistical offices, to have partnerships with researchers, international partnerships, to share knowledge, because we cannot have the luxury to train all our people overnight to look in a different way. They have to take care for the core business. If you want like this, we need some thinking from outside.
Carlos.
Yes, I think that Mariana did a summary of my concern when she told us that it's impossible to get a picture of tomorrow with a glance of yesterday or today. It's impossible because we will be not focusing in the right way what is there. And this means that for me it's clear that we need to have 3 or 4 points that are important. First of all, we need to go ahead with the harmonization of concepts, with the creation of taxonomy that is the same for every one, in order to make the figures comparable and at the same time to work with them. And this is important in order to get a coordination. Second, we need to look clearly if we have the concepts or the categories that we need for new things that are arriving or that we need to grasp. And this is a point where we are always, I will say, running beyond the curve. We need to go a little more faster and to understand what is going on. Third, we need to take advantage of technology, and more we need to understand that we need to introduce artificial intelligence within this exercise, because it will be a way of first promoting the capacity that is available of the human resources, and second, to put new questions about the data that we have available, without putting at risk the consistency of this information, but to know how to exploit the information that is available. And perhaps there are some, I will say, information that is not fully exploited because we didn't have the right tools to do it before. The final point that is for me clear is that we need to understand also that digitalization brought us some possibilities to get information directly in the source. For instance, in Europe, we have a new regime in what concerns payments. It's possible to get information from the point where payment is done and to know every day what is going on. But there I have a question that is the following. We need to fight for the public interest that is beyond the publication of statistics. And based on 3 points. First is a way of managing society, managing the economy, and we have a representative governance that are legitimized to do that, and they have the right to get the right information. Second, we have the confidentiality, I will say obligations to deal with that information, and not in order to avoid that someone takes advantage for private objectives of that information. And third, we have the skills to ensure that the information has the quality that is needed in order to make it useful. And for me, it's clear that the main point that we need to underline is that we are doing an activity that is in name of public interest. And in name of public interest, it must be promoted, defended. And when I see someone from statistics side asking permission to do something, to those that are beneficiaries of this activity, I'm astonished, because the relationship need to be different. Those that are in need of information need to understand that they need to empower those that will get the information, because they are the ones that will provide the public service that is needed. When, for instance, Bruno provides us with all this information that is very useful for us, central banks, is making a public service in terms of providing us a public good. And the idea that statistics is a public good that is like any other instrument that we use to drive a car or to drive something, but it is to drive the society in name of public good. This idea is critical. For me, it's the main point that we need to stress. Is statistics is too much important to be led with statisticians. And statisticians need to be supported, to be promoted, and to be equipped to do what they need to do in order to provide us with the raw materials that we need. Raw materials in the sense of information that we need to understand what we need to do. And for me, it's critical. Without information, I'm driving like a blind person. Where to go? I have no idea. I have a guess, but it's not the real world that we are looking for.
Thank you, Carlos. I think that we have time for one more question from the audience. Yes?
Francisco.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Let me introduce, I'm Francisco Guillem from the National Institute of Statistics and Geography. And I believe that, for instance, all of these issues that we are discussing during this conference needs to put in the box of institution.
Yes.
We have to institutionalize, if I can say that. And that means that we have to think in the national systems. When we are looking, and this is just a comment, it's my opinion, it's not my official opinion. We have to look, of course, the users in one hand. The communication means for the users how to make a statistical culture in one hand and what they need on the other hand. For the producers means, from our point of view, how to put the new age, the new data age inside of the statistics in accuracy and reliable views to satisfy that needs. And to be very clear to the users. And of course, the other thing is not only speak about the public good, I mean the information as a public good. We have to speak about the national interest of the information.
Yes.
And that means to know a very big structure, to introduce probably technical committees, and in the case of Mexico this is our practice, and I would like to share this idea because for us it's a good way to introduce these points. So digital economy is a new age of challenge, but at the same time means opportunity. If I am speaking in some cases with big data to make this information in a structured way, we know that probably we get opportunity, not perfect data, but opportunity to the users and to respond very quickly for some specific social or economics or environmental phenomena. And we are trying to work in that side. The main idea that I would like to comment is we have to think in these new views about the national and international statistical systems in the different trends and inside the infrastructure of concepts, harmonization, accuracy is part of the daily work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any comments on this?
Just agree. It's easy.
Everyone agrees.
I agree with it.
We agree too.
I was expecting that Francisco about the institutional side will raise a question about the acknowledgement and the, I will say, and the preservation of the independence of the statistical offices and of the profession. It's very important to ensure that when the statistical office is publishing a statistics, there is no political interpretation about the opportunity or the meaning of these statistics. And to be very clear, we need to provide to the statistical office the same status that we provide to the central banks. Independence, in order to be sure that they will do what is necessary to do, and they have a relationship with those that are providing information that is a very well-trusted relationship with public opinion and with providers of information. For me, it's critical. If we don't provide that, it's difficult to get information, the right information, and at the same time to have the right, I will say, the right expectation from the public opinion.
Can I say something? Just
Yes.
A very quick observation. I think what we've seen in many countries, and even at the OECD, of course, is that we respond very well to public policy concerns coming from government and ministries, and that constituency of users, I think, is a user group that we've always served very well, because there's a direct channel from them to us. And in many countries, they've set up user groups so they can communicate with their users, which includes the press, academics, and a few others, to communicate messages to them. But I think one of the lessons that we've learned, certainly post the financial crisis, is that we're still operating in our bubbles, and we're not fully communicating with the public at large in terms of communicating messages to them. Do you understand this? Is this the type of indicator that you can readily understand? And given the fact that the public space today is being flooded with fake news or other data sources that the public themselves look at on a regular basis, not for policy purposes, but it's just interesting to them, that's a type of dialogue I think that we need to start engaging in. We need to start thinking about different parts of society that can come through to these user group consultations, and we engage with them, not necessarily at the same time as our core user groups, the press, ministries, but there needs to be a different type of relationship or some dialogue with the public.
Okay, well, we have reached the end of the allotted time to this panel. So first of all, let's give a round of applause to the members of the panel. Well done, well done. And I was also asked to say a few words in closing. I know that Mariana has a flight to take, so it will be very short. Just to say that for us as a central bank, I think that the discussion in these 2 days has been pretty reassuring on the one hand in terms of, some of the work that we are doing on the statistical side, trying to keep us much engaged with international discussion on the development of standards and indicators and so on. So that's something that Gloria has led, and I think that most of what we have discussed yesterday and today illustrates how relevant that is. Second, I think it's also reassuring in terms of the priority that we have given to exploit the granularity of data for macro purposes, a point that Carlos raised yesterday, and that I believe that Elias Albaili illustrated in his presentation yesterday as well. So reassuring on a number of dimensions. At the same time, I think that we get a sense of the challenge that is ahead of us in dealing with the digital transformation and statistics. In terms of how to measure the contribution of the digital economy to GDP, transforming big data into novel financial and macroeconomic indicators, investing on digital infrastructure, developing the skills that we need to deal with all this. And finally, I think that especially with this last round of discussion, a sense of urgency on the institutional side of statistics. As you know, I mean, all the Chileans here know that it is already, I think it's 5 years that we have had proposals for stepping up the governance of statistics in Chile, and we have not got through yet. We know that the Ministry of the Economy is preparing a number of amendments to propose to Congress, but there is one special dimension of that is not just the governance or the institutional part of it, but is the issue of access to databases, the ability to share information, share data with a number of potential users. That I think that the more we take in delivering on these issues and setting new rules of the game that are up to date with our current reality, we are missing a lot. And by us, I don't mean so much the central bank, because fortunately we have managed to have access to databases from other public institutions, but there are many researchers, many policymakers that do not have that possibility. And the more we take in resolving this issue, we will still be paying some cost. So, well, there is nobody here in this room will be voting on this, but perhaps we should be a little more outspoken in terms of the urgency of resolving and delivering this new framework for statistics in Chile. So with that and with all the takeaways that we have from this meeting, I think that we can bring this to a close. Thanking to all participants, especially those that came from far away. I think we had an extraordinary group of presenters and commentators and so on. So I think that is a testimony to the richness of this conference. And we look forward to the next one. Mariana has suggested already a few themes for 2 years ahead. So thank you very much, and thank you to all the people that have been working in putting this agenda together and making this event a reality. Thank you very much.